Okay, welcome. Oh, today's topic, how to talk to people you really don't agree with. How many of you can relate to this topic? I know I can. And we're going to talk about also what, when there's more at stake than winning an argument, what it really means to talk to people we don't agree with.
Okay.
So the song I just played was All the World Is One by Peter Mayer. So a few tech things. Please mute yourself unless you are actively speaking, and stay silent, or you can just stay silent while not engaging in conversation. A designated monitor, Jonathan Best, thank you, Jonathan Best, will be monitoring the chat box and any raised hands. If you would like live closed captions that will pop up as people are speaking, you can click on the three dots that say more, or it may just show up on the bottom. Click on live transcript. Oops, I think I have to enable it first. Live transcript enable. Click enable, and then it should show up for you. We'll also be using the chat box during this meeting as one option for participating. Excuse me. To use the chat box, click on the three dots that say more, then click on chat, and you can type where it says type message here. To close the chat box, click on the down arrow on the top left of the box, then click close. The other option is just to raise your hand to speak out, which the Zoom monitor will be looking out for. Thank you. We will be collectively contributing to a Google document, but that will just be on my screen, so you all won't have to worry about any tech for that. Is it doing that weird thing where it creates like blocky spaces for you all where you can't see the full screen, or can you see the full presentation?
It's okay.
It's okay. Okay, great. So we strive to be a fully accessible space. So please just make yourselves as comfortable as possible. This is totally a space where you can lie down, have your eyes closed during the meeting, whatever you need to be as comfortable as you can. I know Zoom can be hard to engage with for long periods of time. So if you need to turn off your camera, leave and come back, whatever you need, please feel welcome to do so. If at any point your access needs are not being met, or you need something in order to feel more comfortable, please feel welcome to do whatever you need to do, including, standing up, stretching, leaving, using the bathroom, etc. And if you need anything from me, please either let the Zoom monitor know or let me know. And Jonathan, do you mind changing your Zoom name to say like Zoom monitor or something like that? Just before your name?
Something catchy like that.
Yeah. So people can see it. Okay, so I was thinking we could do a fun little connection game for introductions. So I'll read this out and then I'll put it in the chat. So if you can say your name, your pronouns being how you like to be referred to, that can be they, them, ze, zir, she, her, he, him, what you're wearing and look like, any access needs you might have. So what you need to be as comfortable as possible in the space. The idea being that everyone has access needs. So if yours are met, please say my needs are met. A word or phrase that describes how you're arriving here today, whether that's like excited or tired or whatever, just to kind of connect our outside world to the Zoom space. And then we'll do a little connecting game. So basically what that will look like is you'll share like between like 1 to 3 things that are special about you. And then people who relate to what you're saying can raise their hands. And then you can pick one of those people to go next. And it doesn't have to be like directly related. It can make you think of something that you want to share or whatever. So for example, person A might say, I like to ride horses and I'm a good listener. And so person B will raise their hand and be like, oh, that I can relate to that. Person A will pick person B, and then person B will say, like, for example, I used to ride horses as a kid. And then they'll go into their intro, and then they'll do the connection game to the next person until everyone has shared. Does that make sense? I can go first. So my name is Anna. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am wearing a green sweater, and the theme is green today because I have green leaf earrings with a purple back. green lipstick, green eyeshadow. I feel like I look like an alien, which I am into today. Just channeling full alien energy. And I have a background of a yellow wall, and you can sort of see the corner of my fan that says port bar on it. My access needs are basically, well, for one thing, I'm sick. So thank you so much for meeting over Zoom. I really appreciate your flexibility with that. I know meeting in person is nicer sometimes, but it's really cool that we have this option because I can still see you today and not get anyone sick. So that's one thing. And then I just realized I haven't really eaten dinner, so I'm going to probably be eating soup while I listen to people's introductions. And a word or phrase that describes how I'm arriving here today. More prepared than usual, which is great. Okay, so then 2 to 3 things that are special about me. I love fun makeup. I really care about like organizing and activism, and I have the best dog in the world. So if you relate to any of that, you can raise your hand and I'll pick you. Yeah, so welcome. Just a little bit quickly about who I am. I've been working in nonprofits and organizing work for about 9 years at this point. So I have been sort of on a lifelong journey to learn more about how change actually happens. And so it was important to me to like share what I've learned over the years with people. I don't pretend to be an expert. I'm still a student. I'm still learning. But I just wanted an opportunity to share with people. And I've increasingly been working under the belief that the knowledge is already in the room so much of the time. I think especially with this subject today, we live in Prescott, we have these kinds of conversations, and I think that we know more than we think we do about it. So I'm excited to explore this topic with you all today. The Changemaker workshops, as you probably know, are monthly workshops for people who care about the world and want to learn skills to take meaningful action in our communities. The goal of these workshops is to help us develop the skills we need to build and engage with radical, resilient, and connected communities, and to take action on the issues that are important to us. And so, today, this is actually last month's topic, but it is related, talking about how we organize and build resilient, connected movement communities. Today, we'll be talking about how we talk to folks that we may not agree with. Just some acknowledgements and contributions. Please consider donating to the Launchpad today if you are in the financial position to do so. I keep these workshops intentionally free for now, partially so that folks with the means can do so, can put our money where our mouth is by contributing between $25 to $100 to groups that are already doing this work that we're talking about in real time. So on the next slide is information about the Launchpad. They are working with these kinds of ideas already. And so if you are privileged to live comfortably in the society, I invite you to consider wealth redistribution as part of your contribution to the movement. And there are hyperlinks to this in the slides that I'll share with you if you want to learn more about wealth distribution. So just quick shout out to the Launchpad Teen Center. This is a group that is on the ground doing this work in real time in our Prescott area community. In their own words, the Better Together campaign is a call to action to engage in civil discourse and encourage respect for differences. Through Better Together, we hope to discover the issues affecting our community and to offer tools to facilitate meaningful conversations, starting small with a guidebook for families at their own dinner table and expanding to include large-scale conversations with all of Yavapai County. So you can fill out their survey at a link that I've provided, and we'll also send it an email. And you can also donate at the launchpadteencenter.org/donate. They're a really great group. I highly recommend checking them out. So our agenda for today, as I mentioned, I am going to do my very best to end half an hour earlier than we usually do, since I know Zoom can be hard for 3 hours. So we're going to go for ending at 8. So intros and welcome. We'll talk briefly about covenant and group agreements. We'll spend some time discussing some of the questions and conversations, and I'll do some note taking around that. Then we'll have a small group activity that involves storytelling. I'm going to talk briefly about positionality. Don't worry, I will tell you what that word means. And then we'll do a 30-minute break. We'll do a role-playing activity, do some takeaways from today, and closing. So that was last 1 month, so please ignore that. So I shortened our covenant. I hope you don't mind. I think we spend a lot of time reading it every month, so I have included a link for the full one, but I think it basically boils down to this. We work at creating a welcoming space for all people, and we strive to center the experiences, voices, wisdom, and boundaries of the people who have experienced the most marginalization in our communities, wherever possible, and especially when speaking about the issues that affect folks directly. We work to actively unlearn and reject white supremacy, body shaming, transphobia, ableism, classism, and patriarchal behavior in all its forms, and we work to replace it with a more loving, connected community. In situations where the comfort of one party would come at the expense of the safety of another party, we will always prioritize safety over comfort. When mistakes happen, we each strive to be open to difficult conversations, to release defensiveness, to leave space for ourselves and each other to grow, to make time to reflect and learn, and to focus on healing, love, and trust building. And we believe that together we can build a compassionate community of trust, healing, and care for one another. And I will also email you the link to the full covenant if you are interested. So I'll start us off with a bell hooks quote. Joe, would you like to read this quote for us?
Sure. The world would be a paradise of peace and justice if global citizens shared a common definition of love, which would guide our thoughts and action.
So I'm going to actually take us off of screen share for a second. I wanted to ask you all your thoughts on this. I set up a few questions, and I thought that we could sort of have a discussion around the different questions and think about what we might already know, what we might have experienced and know about some of the answers to them around how we talk to people that we don't agree with. Just a quick reminder about how we do discussions. If you are someone who loves talking, that is wonderful. I am one of those people. And it's important for us to remind ourselves that sometimes it's okay for there to be silence. Sometimes people who don't love talking need that space in order to take a step forward. So people who are quieter, we love our listeners as much as we love our talkers. If that's the space you're in today, that is wonderful. If I notice that some people aren't speaking as much, I'll probably invite you to speak. And you can always say thanks, but pass. That is totally fine too. We love to respect people's boundaries. So let me share my screen again. All right. Does anyone have any questions about that before I launch into this? All right, cool. And actually I have a poll. So sometimes on Zoom when I share my screen, it's hard because we can't see each other as well. So would you all prefer that I read you the questions and put them in the chat and I'll take notes off screen, or that I have the questions and the notes on screen while we talk to each other? So option 1, raise your hand if you would prefer to see each other and I'll just put the questions in the chat. Raise your hand if you prefer that. Okay, I see 1, 2, 3, 4 for that one. And raise your hand if you would prefer that I have the notes on screen with the questions. See 1, 2, 3. Okay, we have a couple absentees. So I will also share the Google Doc so you can, if you're someone who likes to have that visual, you can have that as well. And I see you nodding, Molly. Does that work okay for you? Okay, great. Cool. So our first question is, why are we having these conversations where we really don't agree with the other person in the first place? What is it that we feel at stake in these conversations? What is bringing us to this conversation? So I'll put that in there and I will share the Google Doc. And if anyone feels so called right now, feel free to jump on in. Here, I can read what you said. It's important to find the person inside of the differences. I feel we're also intrinsically connected and there's so many things we share. I feel this force coming in. We have to find a way to connect that goes deeper than these ideas that we believe. Anyone else feel like sharing around this question of why are we having these conversations and what's at stake? Yeah, I think that also brings up an interesting question of like, when are we having these conversations and how are we having these conversations? And the topic is not just like, how do we have conversations about things we don't agree with, but how do we talk to people we don't agree with, and so I'm curious if anyone has thoughts. That's actually, I'm going to jump to one of the next questions, which was, how does our context and relationship to the other person shape how we're able to interact? And I'll put that in the chat and read it again. How does our context and relationship to the other person shape how we are able to interact? How do you figure out if they're ready to have a conversation? You don't have to come to an agreement. I think that's important. I'm actually, whoever wants to speak next, go ahead. I just thought of something I wanted to share with you all. Yeah, that makes me wonder, coming back to this question, how does our context and relationship to the other person shape our interactions? Like what happens, and is it possible to connect with people around the things that we have in common first before getting to those questions, And how do we do that? Especially because as has been a theme with several of us, and I know is true in my life, we do kind of isolate ourselves in these bubbles, especially when like the other side feels so scary, So how do we facilitate that? And is that where we start? What I'm hearing is relationship building. Yeah. I think in Prescott, I can relate to that, Molly, because moving back here, I knew there would be challenges to being queer in this town, big challenges. And there are times and that was part of the reason actually that I intentionally moved back here, was because it wasn't even, I just couldn't even be open to that part of myself while I was living here as a kid until I moved away, even though I was part of a very supportive community with Granite Peak. So I think that sometimes my role in Prescott becomes sort of the queer ambassador. Like, I'm someone that smiles a lot. I make small talk. I try to make people feel included, and it's baby steps, and it's exhausting, but it's like, it's important to try and remember like who I'm doing it for. And it's for those kids like me, right? That need to have more loving adults in their lives. And so I hear you. Yeah. That was another question that was coming up for me, like, excuse me. Figuring out when is the time to speak up? How do you speak up? Because I think there is this sort of like, politeness that kicks in for ourselves, right? Where it's like, oh, well, the polite thing would be just to smile and nod, or the easier thing would be to smile and nod. And sometimes I think that's what's needed. And I think figuring out, like, I don't know. I've had several friends that I grew up with who were very conservative growing up. And I almost just feel like, and we didn't really talk about politics. We talked about them a little bit when I was younger, but not a lot. Um, but it wasn't a secret what I believed. It wasn't a secret what they believed. And just, yeah, over time, um, a lot of them have changed and have questioned those things. And there's no way to know like how that happened, but I do wonder if like being in a relationship with someone so different from them played a part in that. And so it's like, when is it more important to maintain the relationship? When is it more important to say something? Can you have both? I think becomes a really important question, especially in Prescott. I'm curious if folks have thoughts around that. Yeah, cracking open the door. Yeah. I think that sort of segues into sort of this question of how would we like, well, okay, there's sort of two questions. You all can let me know which one you're more interested in discussing first. One of them is, what is our goal when talking to people, quote, on the other side? Because I think it's important for us to sort of nail down like what is it that we're trying to do here? What is it that we're keeping at our core to remind ourselves this is why we're doing this? And the second one, which is related, how would we like our values to show up in these conversations? If anyone has a preference, just go ahead and jump in. Yeah, and I like what Maria was saying, where there's a way in which you can maintain your values and maintain what you're trying to say without needing to agree, or just with, I like that personal fact thing. I think that's really helpful. And just cracking the door open, because you're not going to agree. You're never going to change someone's mind on something that they've made their mind up of. They have to do that themselves if it's going to happen. But if they're never presented with any ideas other than what they already think, and if we're never presented with ideas other than what we already think, I mean, I don't think there's a single person in this room who hasn't changed our mind on something, right, over time. And I have noticed, this is just something I'm noticing, is that we've been using a lot of language like those people on the other side, like a lot of othering language. And I think it's important to note and consider. Yeah, anyone else have thoughts on like what our goal, what our purpose is when we're talking to people on the other side? Yeah, I think that's so true. I like what you were saying about like smiling, because I think body language is a huge thing, especially again in Prescott. I was at a protest. It was at the corner of Glassford and 69. And it was around, oh God, I don't even remember which immigration thing at this point. But I was holding a sign that said, no human being is illegal, and it had some butterflies on it and whatever. And I was holding it and I was just kind of like very serious. Oh, all right, that would be my dog. I was very serious and whatever. And what I tell you, I got flipped off more times than I could count. Big trucks, and they go by with their smoke and whatever. And I was like, well, this is really frustrating. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to start smiling and waving. I'm just going to try it. And like you said, people didn't know what to do with that. People driving by me did not agree with what I was saying, but they kind of would like look and be like, okay, and like there was sort of a type that would flip you off, and like those cars would drive by and they would look at you, but they would just drive by. I think that's interesting. There's building bridges, like you said, Jonathan, like in that song, I think is so important. Let's give about 2 minutes to talking about how we'd like our values to show up in these conversations, and then we'll take break. Yeah. I can get us started. I think this comes back to like finding common ground for me. Like, I think that values, we actually share a lot of the same values with people that we disagree with, in my personal opinion. I was talking to a friend recently who has become very, very right-wing religious. And I am not Christian, but I do consider myself spiritual. And we had this really interesting conversation about, like how we experience spirituality. And she goes to a church where they spend a lot of time, like, standing up and dancing and their arms in the air. And I'm like, that sounds great. That sounds like a great expression of spirituality to me. I would love something like that. And we also talked about love. And I think that for her, like, God is love, and for me, I see love in I define it slightly differently, but I think that we still had the same values where, like, we really love all people, and we really, like, want we want people to feel more love. It's really what it boils down to. So I feel like that was an example of when, my values, sharing values, I was able to sort of get more to the core of the conversation. Because if we spend all this time talking about, like, oh, I don't know about obedience as, a thing that I want to center in my life, like, I'm not going to convince her that that's not, the way to go. And who knows, maybe I'm wrong about it, right? We have to have space for that too. But I think that, like, if we can come back to that love, I really think most people are trying to be good people. I really do. And we just sometimes have different definitions of what that means. But if we can come back to those values, that for me feels really important. But yeah, I also wanted to lift up what we said about buzzwords and vocabulary. That's something that I know I am working on, because I love my big words. I love my buzzwords, but sometimes it's not the most effective way to communicate with people. Um, so yeah, and I think that, like if you can say, I don't know, instead of, like, throwing out the word capitalism, be like, I just feel like it's unfair that, rich people have certain advantages over poor people or whatever. Like that, I feel like you would be able to bridge more. That's just off the top of my head. More differences, than throwing out the C word.
True.
Fighting our assumptions and irrational or disproportionate feelings of fear or discomfort, while easier in the relationship, could be helpful for all. Yeah, so, like, fighting that fear and discomfort to sort of bridge, is that's certainly a commonality we all have, I think, in these conversations.
And then the next one is, for me, the goal is to understand the person's perspective as well as hopefully be understood. Find common ground, brainstorm strategies that meet both our needs.
Yeah, I think, yeah, something that this is also making me think about, which I'll sort of get after the break, is like who we are in a society. So for example, me having a conversation with someone who's homophobic and me trying to share about my experiences, and, like, it's just not going to go well. There are other conversations I can have with that person, but I'm not going to be able to reach them in that way, in that moment, most likely. However, if you are an ally or you have a kid who's queer or whatever it is, you may be able to have that conversation. You may be seen as an us to them, and be able to have that conversation in a different way. And I think in this community in particular, I wonder sometimes about, like, our role as white people in having conversations with people who hold white supremacist beliefs, if that is, like, something that we have to be doing in order to, like, try and bring down the temperature and, like work through some of those, and bridge that difference, because we just can't keep doing this. you know yeah. All right, any other final thoughts before we go on break? All right, so welcome back. So I wanted to share a quick note about positionality. Positionality. Six syllables. One of my favorite Great big words that I love. My mom started teasing me a couple years ago about the number of syllables in the words I would just throw into sentences. So now it's become a habit of mine to count them. Okay, but I wanted to share screen. Here you go. Okay, so what do I mean by positionality? So positionality refers to how differences in social position and power shape identities and access in society. So in other words, depending on your identity and the context of the situation, the same conversation might have a different impact on the people involved, depending on who is involved in the conversation. So for example, I'll just use myself as an example. When I'm talking to cisgendered men, in other words, men who are not trans or non-binary, I personally sometimes find it very difficult to have conversations around sexism. So some examples of factors that might make it harder for me on any given day are when I've been exposed to a lot of gendered violence or microaggressions lately. So, and that can be either first or secondhand. Microaggressions mean, we can count syllables later. Microaggressions meaning sort of smaller, but still significant assumptions about things that come off in a sexist way, or things people say and do. So when I've been exposed to a lot of gendered violence or microaggressions lately, either first or secondhand, because I do a lot of work in community, so sometimes secondhand gendered violence can be very impactful for me. That can make it hard for me to talk about sexism right now with a cis man. Or when the person I'm talking to is sexism from the perspective of a detached intellectual debate or discussion, but it's something that impacts my life in very painful and direct ways. That can be another thing that can make it difficult. Or when the person is being directly sexist towards me, which has also happened. And it's clear that they are not willing to value or listen to me about what my experiences in reality are. So all of those things, that just doesn't happen around sexism. It can also happen around homophobia, transphobia, racism, ableism, all sorts of fun identities that can make it more difficult to have these conversations. All these factors can make it more difficult and even damaging for me than it might be for the other person to have the same conversation. So, yeah, all that to say just that some conversations may be safe for some people to engage in, but not for others. So like Peter, you were talking about the September 4th stuff on the square, and we've mentioned this before, you know, as a white person, it's something that you might be able to have a conversation or engage in ways, whereas it could be very, very dangerous, you know, for a person of color. So that's just examples of positionality. If we're directly impacted by the topic that someone is talking about, meaning that our identities are sort of like in line with that, we can check in with ourselves about whether we are feeling emotionally resourced enough to have that conversation in that moment. And if not, it's okay to change the subject or to set boundaries to keep you safe. We might even ask an ally to follow up later. I have done this with people, and actually what ends up happening in relationships that continue is that I have found over time, we're actually able to have better conversations that don't leave me feeling hurt or empty or just like really exhausted, because I'm able to have those conversations when I do feel emotionally resourced. If you're an ally and we're not directly impacted by the topic, we can be intentional about what we hope to get across with the conversation. As we know, the sad reality is that a lot of times people will listen to people that they consider to be like them, but not to people who are directly impacted by the issue. So we can be really intentional about not speaking for directly impacted people because we're not the experts, but we can share about what we've learned over time, and we can direct people to online and print resources created by directly impacted people. And again, I say online and print resources, not actually like, hey, I may not know everything about sexism, but go talk to a woman, you know, for the reasons we just covered. And yeah, with all that said, even though it's hard and it's unfair, the truth is that sometimes directly impacted people, we have to advocate for ourselves and explain our experiences to people in order for things to change. Some of the most powerful conversations I personally have had that have led to shifts in perception have been about certain experiences with sexism, queerphobia, and ableism, and specifically how those experiences have made me feel. I found that like when talking to people who may not understand that or may not have first-hand experience, sometimes if you can be like, hey, like this was my reality and this happens on, you know, a regular basis and this is how it makes me feel, that can actually make a really big difference on how they perceive those things. So yeah, I'm curious about, you know, what can help us feel more resourced in these situations. If anyone had any thoughts on that, you know, that was kind of a lot to throw at you all at once. And thanks for listening to me share about that. Any thoughts? Cool. Should we do some small group activity? Get a thumbs up from people. All right, cool. So I will share my, let me share my screen again with you. Okay, so it is 7:35. Let me look at my timetable. I do want to respect your time. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes to do this activity, which should be about right. So as I mentioned, so I'll break you all into groups of 2. There might be one group of 3. So you'll share about, so the first person, you'll kind of decide amongst yourselves who will share which story. Will share about a conversation that they feel went really badly with someone that they didn't agree with. And the other person will share about a time that they felt it went really well with someone that they agreed with. And then, so whoever's listening, if you can just make a few mental or written notes about the person's story, and like discuss it afterwards. You'll have about 5 minutes for each story. Then that, I think that will help us to sort of bring that into the group conversation, and we'll have a few minutes to share about these in the group, and then we'll close out for the evening. Any questions? I'll leave this up while I'm creating the groups. If I can do that. Come back. Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop share because clearly multitasking is not my forte today. Well, I'm going to put this in the chat also so that you have that to look at and remind you what we're doing. And I'll send reminders to the groups each time. I think I'm going to give you about 4 minutes for each person to speak. So be thinking about which story you might be called to speak. And I will open up the rooms. Any questions before I go ahead and do that? Well, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a conversation where you're discussing something you disagree with. It could be a conversation with someone whom you disagree with. You know what I mean? So like someone who you don't share the same political or values or whatever with, but you were able to have a conversation that maybe made you feel like you were closer to them, or allowed you to continue the relationship, or however you want to interpret that. You can interpret it pretty loosely. All right, well, we are all back in the room. Welcome back, everybody. Let's give it about, we have about 3 or 4 minutes for any sort of thoughts that anyone wanted to share about, you know, what helped a conversation go well versus not well, and or anything that you sort of took away from that conversation. I'd love to hear from our different groups. Yeah, okay, I wanted to read you that quote from this article now. So I sent this article to you all before, and I'll email it to you again. It's called Braver Angels Aims to Mend Our Polarized Relationships. So Braver Angels is talking about this nonprofit, and I'll just read you this paragraph. The Seattle journalist and author of I Never Thought of It That Way champions a, quote, curiosity mindset, one practiced by a nonprofit bent on depolarizing the country. Braver Angels convenes Americans of all political stripes to foster dialogue, understanding, and civility around highly contentious issues facing our nation. Yeah, so I think the things I wanted to pull out of that were the the curiosity mindset, I think, is really interesting. We've had several people talk about like listening and like trying to find out what the other person thinks, things like that. And the idea of dialogue, fostering dialogue, understanding, and civility, I think is really interesting. So yeah, just wanted to throw that out there. Any other thoughts on our last thing that we did, or anything else from today that you're taking away? I think the nonviolent communication, Ainsley told me about this really good book called Healing Resistance that I'm working towards. And it's all about talking about conflict, which personally I really struggle with. As my job, I do it a lot, but I struggle with conflict. It makes me very like activated and anxious a lot of the time. So like finding out more tools around that, I think is really great. I'd love to do a workshop around that sometime, but I have to figure out how to do that first. Anything else, things that went well, things that maybe didn't go well in these conversations? Yeah. No, thank you for saying that. I think that's really important to keep in mind. Like, maybe part of the way that we can escape these sorts of polarization is by sort of letting ourselves not think about this as a binary, letting ourselves sort of question that idea of us and them, our side, their side, left and right. And like, yeah, throw that out the window, especially just as an organizer and, thinking about this politically, right? Like Arizona has like a lot of independence. Like I think we have a higher percentage of independence than the national average, certainly. And like, I think it's really important for us. Like, I think a lot of people in this, okay, hold on. I don't want to get too far on a tangent because we're running out of time, but I'll just leave it at that. Like, I think a lot of us aren't really on that, like fully left or right, like that binary. And I thank you for bringing that to it. So if people want to take just like 1 minute to pull out some paper or to just take a mental note, and just like sort of think through our conversation today and consider whether you have any major takeaways from this conversation. And the goal of this is just for you to have something that you can kind of hold on to after we move through this. It's hard to remember a whole 3 hours, but I think we can remember one thing, And then, and if anyone wants to share that into the space while we're writing that down, you are welcome to do so. And then we'll do our closing and finish out. Yeah. I think there's sort of a common thread of like, developing a relationship before the point of conflict.
Mhm.
Yeah, and one thing that I was really tempted to include in today's presentation, but I also know that I always run out of time, so I didn't. Aren't you proud of me? Was conflict within our own organizations, because I think that's a really, really big thing. Peter and I were talking about that a little bit. Especially in organizing work, I see it happen all the time. I saw it happen last week where people get disposed of because they didn't show up in a way that the group thought was right, whether that's politically or whatever it is, and I think that yeah, what you said, Ardella, not throwing away an entire person because we don't agree on one thing. That idea of another big word, disposability politics, meaning like this idea of like throwing someone out is it's what we do in our prison system, and we don't need to do it in our movements, It feels, I don't know about you all, but I feel like we just like planted something. I feel like we just started something today. And I'm really curious if you all feel like reaching out and like sharing if anything from here grows into something else. I would love to share that with you. Okay, so to close us out, slideshow, hit the right button this time. Now to share my screen. Great. So this is this is from the introduction of Beyond Survival: Strategies and Stories from the Transformative Justice Movement. I have barely started this book. It's already really great, but this stuck out to me. And there's a photo of a pink and cream colored heart on a dark brown background. Kind of looks like it's created from globby streaks of paint or glue or icing, and it creates a very messy, alive looking image. It's an image from marriagegeek.com. So the offering is this. The primary offering here is a space to be. Be here. Be all over the place. Be messy. Be wrong. Be bold in your hopefulness. Be confused in community. Be reaching past isolation. Be part of the problem. Be hungry for the after. Be helpful in the midst. Be so early in the process. Be broken by belief. Be bolstered by brave comrades. Be unbelievably unready. Be alive.
Yeah,
All right.
Beautiful.
wonderful.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you.
Feel better.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you again for your flexibility, and I wish you well as you transition back into non-Zoom space.